Hello and welcome to Film Companion South. In today's Ask PR, we are going to be talking about K Balachander, one of my favorite filmmakers. Sharath97 asks, would you call K Balachander an experimental filmmaker? Because two of his films, Abura Ragangal about complex relationships and Innitale Nikom, a bleak film about a widow's past life, seem extremely experimental, although both films were hits. It's hilarious to think how Balachander's producers could have said yes to such insane premises, insane in a good way. I don't know how you would define the word experimental, but he was definitely drawn to very unique subjects, and I think that's what he kept trying to do. He wanted to make films about people and relationships. He wasn't interested in large, except for the odd Tanir Tanir kind of film. He was less interested in social concerns than in exploring the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. And I think every time he got a new angle, that's what he was after. So that way he was experimental, I guess, because the kind of permutations and combinations that he's covered, I think even today not many people have done that in terms of experimenting in terms of relationships. Yes, and many of these films were hits, and but one thing is also that in those days filmmakers had a lot of freedom to make the kind of films they want, relatively speaking, to today, because the only way to watch movies was to go to the theater, and there was no VCR, there was no computer, nothing. So the point is that if people wanted to watch a film, they had to go to the theater, which meant that more numbers of people, the footfalls were more in terms of watching films. So today you have a film coming out, let's say even Balachandran makes a film today, had he been alive, and but what would have happened is, like, a small bunch of people, because today we have such a youth driven audience that only wants to see like these mega mass kind of movies. Balachandra's film would have gotten a small opening, and then maybe it would have become a hit, or maybe some people would just say, oh, you know what, this is the kind of movie that I can watch on Netflix or Amazon. So that might have happened as well. So the time that he belonged to was also a very important factor in terms of how those small and very experimental, as you call them, films became hits. CHV 90 says, we talk about female centric movies these days. By KB sir was the one that talked a lot about the women in the early 70s and 80s. The million movies like How Old Are You is not new to those who watched his movies like Manadil Urudi Vendum and Avaloru Thodarkadai, Kalyana Agadigal. But he's also talked about the problem they cause, like in Puva Tale or Bama Vijay. The climax of Bama Vijayam, Balaya conveys theme by saying Avadam Pennale, Arivadam Pennale. It looks like he conveys stories on both extremes. These messages as intact. What is your view on this? I would definitely agree with one fact that nothing like the How Old Are You kind of movies are not new at all to anybody who's watched Balachandra's films, because there are so many women-centric roles that his films had, and he kind of talked about a lot of these problems, but he was also a very unique, and I like to think of him as an author in that sense, because he really saw women through the filter of his mind, in the sense that, his movies would kind of go towards like a happy ending, so to speak, for the woman, but then Balachandar would just push them off a cliff and give them these slightly sad and bizarre endings. So I think on the one hand, there was this part of him that really empathized with women and wanted to tell their stories. In another thing, he kind of like wanted something, kept withholding that happy ending from them. If you look at Arangetram is probably a bizarre example, because this woman, she's sacrificed her entire life for the sake of her large family, and she's, become a sex worker, she's, lost her purity, so to speak, and all that. But the Shivakumar character is willing to marry her, and then she kind of goes mad. I'm like, why? Because, yes, she suffered enough, and she's gotten to that point where Shivakumar is shocked, and then they find out, and then Shivakumar's father also agrees. I'm not saying it could have been a had end. It's not that it could have been a complicated marriage, of course, but I'm like, and then she goes mad, and I'm okay, I don't know, I don't get this at all. So I think there are a lot of his films where I've had these problems with the endings, but there is no doubt that he loved women in the sense that he wanted to explore them, tell stories about them, and no female-centric filmmaker today can escape the shadow of K. Balachandar, the kind of characters that he created. Navindra Nas Partale Parasam was a movie I liked, but on retrospect it could have been a futuristic film even in these times, and many people I know either loved it or hated it. Your thoughts? I hated the film. I don't like it at all. I'm sorry, but it was just so bizarre and out there. That scene with Simran coming and saying, this sari is something that you bought, and then flinging it at Madhavan and all that. I could not take that film at all. This is not one of my favorite. But then let me also tell you that my favorite phase of K. Balachandar is the 1970s, early 1970s. This Avaloru Thodarkadai is 73, I think, around that time, to Sindhu Bhairavi, which is around 85. That's a fantastic period. There's almost consistently good movies that he made, good to great movies that he made. So that's anything that came after that, like Vaname LA, for instance. I don't mind it. It's nice, and I like the idea of exploring suicide and things like that. But somehow the coherence that was there in this set of films from the early 70s to the mid 80s, that wasn't there in the later films. Aditya Narayan says, do you think his films would have worked had it been released in this time period? I don't think so, because now we're in the age of mega serials. I mean, we are not in the age, it started quite a while ago, but a lot of those issues are now in TV serials. So I don't think people would actually want to go to a theater to see these films. I kind of talked about it a little earlier. Even if a good film of this kind came out, they'll probably say, you know what, I'll watch it on Amazon or something. So maybe a web movie would have been a great way to go. And knowing Balachander's ability to keep adapting to different mediums, had he been alive, I'm sure he would have talked to Netflix and arranged a film deal for his kinds of films. Nidarshan 777 says, what do you think about his use of mise en scène, theatrical dialogues and melodrama? Do you think all of this would be received now as well? I really think that he thought through his camera. Like, I remember one shot in Arangetram where it's a large family, right? So he actually, a dinner time conversation, he stages in such a way that the camera is at this end, and you see two rows of people sitting down, and you capture the vastness of that family in just that one shot. In another shot, there's a sari with a hole in it, and he films through that hole, kind of, looking down at that poverty. See, all of this, it's not subtle exactly, right? So we're not getting into subtle, and I don't think subtle versus non-subtle is just a style. I don't think not being subtle is not great, and being subtle is something to be strived for, because some movies are deliberately, if you're in a melodrama, there's you can't be subtle all the time. I think that symbolism sometimes was very overt, and some people who are used to slightly these foreign films kinds of things might have found it like, oh my god, too much of stuff. But I think he was trying to find ways to escape dialogues and say things through different means, and that's always very interesting for me, especially when you look at his 60s films, which are more theatrical, more symbolism laden, and those things really work for me. Karthik Arul asks, how are some of his directorial touches? He talks about that Adisya Ragam song in Apurva Ragangal, and says the last part, the character sings Orupuram Partal in Bhairavi Ragam, and asks, Bhairavi comes to know only then that she is his love interest. Only those who know that Ragam could have recognized it until he sings that Avaloru Bhairavi. How common people without Carnatic music knowledge could have received this? He was able to make these movies because at that time, there was a lot of space within the mainstream. From you could make these specialized K Balachander kind of movies to the big MGR Shivaji kind of blockbusters. The mainstream was bigger. But then TV came in and the mainstream became smaller, because a lot of this end of the mainstream, not the blockbuster end, but that end of the mainstream was siphoned off into TV, so that became shorter. Now it's even shorter because people are saying that I will only go and watch these big movies on the big screen. So, but in his time, because he was always looking at he was never looking at the MGR Shivaji end where I want to get millions of people buying tickets for the movies. That was never him. He was always interested only in that core niche group that would buy tickets for his movies. So I'm thinking that even if you miss this Bhairavi thing there, you're not really losing anything, because the fact that Kamal loves Srividya is still coming through. This is just another way of telling it. It's not like if you miss it, you're missing the fact that for those who don't know, it's still a song, and at the end of the song, this man is telling this woman that I love you. So I don't think it's a big loss that way. Tarun Prakash says, hey BR, apart from his socio-political films, inclusion of middle class, what do you think KB's contribution in terms of innovative technical aspects? I think he watched a lot of films and kind of kept bringing a lot of that stuff into his films, because I remember watching Tappu Talangal with Rajinikanth, and there's almost like a documentary, like verite shot in that, where somebody's walking, and I think he liked to keep pace with all that, despite his inherent theatricality and that the mise en scène that engendered, because I think he always kind of thought within that stage proscenium. But I think he was within that, tried to always keep pushing things and trying to show things without, like the shot in Apurva Ragangal where Srividya says she's going to a concert, and if Kamal still wants to leave, he's this hot-headed communist, right? If Kamal still wants to leave, he should, but then she ties his finger to the staircase so that it's symbolic, saying, I'm tying you, and if you want it, you'll have to break this tie and go. And then she comes back and she sees that rope, and the rope goes, and you see a like a tracking shot kind of thing, and the rope goes, and then the rope slowly starts vibrating, and it starts vibrating a little more because Kamal is in his room playing Mridangam, and his hand finger is still tied to that thread, and that kind of thing. So again, that kind of stuff for the 70s is quite amazing, and because you've conceived that thing entirely in terms of that visual. You're not talking about a scene being converted from dialogue to visual, but that scene itself is conceived as a visual. So I think that's pretty phenomenal for the time. So Surendang Da Habis says, do you think some scenes in the scenes were deliberately over dramatized, where the camera moves back and forth with super close-ups of the characters, and sometimes you see characters staring at a point for too long? I think over dramatized was thing because he was trying to kind of create a drama that would fit the big screen. Like if you see some movies, there'll be a focus on Sarita's face in the foreground as characters move on in the background. So again, you're talking about a short setup where you're watching this person's expressions as like as things happen in the background. I think when you say over dramatized, again, it comes from perspective, because from today's point of view, just like we see Shivaji's acting and say, okay, maybe he was performing at a pitch that's higher than what people accept as today's pitch. You're looking again at his movies and saying maybe Balachander's was over dramatized, but he was constantly looking to dramatize, and I think that's what we're talking about. Raghuram says, how did Balachandar make 4 to 5 movies in a single year, and why is it not possible for even 2 movies in a year for present directors? I think he just thought very quickly and made those films, and they were cheap movies, and he didn't have to depend on stage dates because he had this little repertory theatre kind of thing where he always had these stars, Sujata, Sarita, Shiv Kumar, Gemini Ganeshan, were always willing to work with him. So I think filmmaking was a little easier at that point because people weren't saying, is this going to become the biggest blockbuster ever? People were just saying, okay, there's a film, let's go try something, let's go make it. It was possible to make films that way, whether you're talking about the director or the stars. Today, there's a lot of calculation involved because the business has become very, very expensive. The theatrical business has become crazy because, the distributors are like saying, we want only this kind of movie. They have control. Audiences are saying, we will only see this kind of movie in a theater. We won't see another kind of movie. So it's become very difficult to kind of plan. I think that's what it is. And writing movies has also become very difficult because there are only a few saleable heroes, and the rest of it things. So I think once it all depends. It's a very interlinked system, but it was much easier in those days when people would just say, let's go make a movie and see what happens. Sahir says, a simple question for the absolute novice. What are the 3 films you think one should begin with? I would again pick 3 films from the period of early 1970s to the mid 1980s. I would say Marumayan Niram Sivappu, which has Kamal Haasan and Sridevi, and it's about the unemployment. I would say Avargal, which has Rajnikant and Sujata and Kamal again. That's a fantastic kind of relationship drama. And the third, I'm trying to give a variety, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'd go with Sindhu Bhairavi because it's another kind of interesting point where he's talking about art and things like that. So that's again a very interesting movie. Pradeep Jayaraman and Without Wax kind of have a similar question. Do you think KB's movies have aged well? Do they stand the test of time? I don't know. I find them very watchable, but then let's take an example from the music world, right? If I play an MS Vishwanathan song to a young person today, like somebody in their teens or 20s, would they listen to it? I don't know, because it depends on 2 things. One is how do they receive this music as compared to the music that they're used to? And second thing is, what is their interest in this music? Are they interested only in, does this make me feel good? Or are they saying, okay, let's go and see what this music is about. How do they make music at that time? So that interest also has to be there. So I would say his movies in that time period that I keep talking about have stood the test of time. I find them eminently rewatchable, but if you're going to show them to today's thing, I'm not talking only about Balachandran, I'm talking about Bharati Raja, I'm talking about Bhagiraj, all these things. If you show them to today's audience, how will they react to it? I don't know. Because some films are of their time, and just a casual viewer might find that either the pace or the filmmaking or the music or whatever it is not up to their taste. So it's really up to people, I think. So I don't think that's an easy question to answer. Geeta says it would be great if you could highlight some key cinematographic techniques or visual motifs, metaphors which inform Balachandra's cinematic oeuvre. I've talked about this a little, but like he kept trying to figure out ways to convert, how to give information to the audience without having it explicitly stated. Like for example, I remember in Sindhu Bhairavi, Suhasini is waiting, right? That's so the idea is to show time passing, and you can show time passing in many ways. You can show pages of a calendar coming off, or you can show a clock ticking, or whatever it is. But now Suhasini is a very educated person in that movie. She like reads a lot. What Balachandra does is he puts a camera that focuses on her door, the main door to her house, and on Monday a bunch of magazines come in, and Tuesdays a bunch of magazines come in, on Wednesdays a bunch of magazines come in, on Thursday a bunch of, and you know these weekly magazines, they come on a specific day of the week, so the regular audience would know, like, you know, time passing. These are all very interesting things that he did. You know, he kind of figured out how to make these things as interesting as possible, and sometimes he did go in for very expressionistic effects, like in Agnisachi, to show the deterioration of Sarita's mental state. He stages a kind of a ballet with very, very bizarre expressionistic kind of lights, which kind of highlight how she, you know, her mind is kind of going. And there's a beautiful composition actually by M.S. Vishwanathan and sung beautifully by S.P. Balasubramaniam. It goes Kana Kannum Kangal Mella. And it's a very lullaby kind of song, but the interludes are these crazy expressionistic, this bizarre ballet kind of thing. So you kind of have this, he's trying to calm her down, but then her mind is naturally exploding, you know, from time to time. And then he's again trying to calm her down, and her mind is exploding again. And that's the kind of stuff that he did. And you should really kind of, you know, see his films, because his 60s films, which I don't rate as highly as his 70s to mid 80s films, those contain a lot of interesting things too. So, but those are more theatrical, and today we call them symbolism. Very overt. But the 70s to 80s films have a lot of such moments, yeah. Jinesh Muralidharan says, your all-time favorite KB film and why? A very tough question, but I think I will choose Our Girl, because that's really very, very good exploration of this woman and the three men who are in her life at various points. It's a really, really, I love that movie. Another movie that I like a lot is Nidal Nijamagiradu, because it's a kind of a taming of a shrew story, but he does it with a lot of elegance. And again, I don't know how today's politics would kind of make you view the film, but it's a very elegant handling of that scenario. I haven't seen that kind of elegance in any other taming of the shrew kind of movie. Just Like That says, I love all his movies except Manmad Leela. What was he trying to convey there? It seems so atypical. Just this horny guy, and he wants to you know, be with a lot of women, and it's just a fun movie. There's no, I mean, I don't think it was trying to convey anything so much. But my favorite part of Manmad Leela is that I forget exactly what, but he's an office colleague of Kamal's, I think, and Kamal confesses to him every time he has these thoughts or does something bad, or, you know, sleeps with women or something like that, and that man becomes like an unwilling accomplice to Kamal's deeds, and that man is hilarious. It's so funny to watch his reactions every time that Kamal confesses to him. Ratnavelu asks, Balachandra Ilayaraja relationship was a relation strained during Pudu Pudu Arthangal, which was carried over to Roja time. You know, there are stories that keep coming out about all this. I don't know what, you know, is true or what is not, but I would say that the best music director relationship that Balachandar has was with MS Vishwanathan, because that extended over a large like span of films, starting from, like, you know, the Avalaru Thodarkadai days to almost just before the Sindhu Bhairavi phase. So you're talking about Varuminiram Segopi, you're talking about Nineta Lenekum, which is a phenomenal soundtrack. And you're also talking about things like Tanir Tanir, where there's a lullaby, Kannana Pumagane. It's like covers a lot of films, and there's a lot of musical ground that these two cover. So I think that's the real thing that Balachandar got. Even though he had very, very good music with the Ilayaraja and with V. Kumar and other people, I think the MSV phase is the great Balachandar music phase. Madan says, KB sir made many movies, but then he started venturing into TV serials in the 80s. His reason was that TV reaches out more. Do you think that's more relevant today when people binge watch HBO series and only blockbusters survive in the cinema? Yeah, we talked about this, but yeah, I think today he would have been on the web, or on a YouTube channel, or on Netflix or Amazon or something like that, because he was always ahead of the curve, and he knew he was not going to change the kind of movies he was making to suit the audience. He was saying, I will find the best medium to host the kind of movies that only I want to make. So that's why the medium, he kept changing from one medium to another. And I think that's the kind of, you find that he was truly modern in his way. So thank you so much for sending in your questions. I really enjoyed this episode because we were talking about one of my favorite filmmakers. See you in the next edition of Ask BR. Until then, keep watching Film Companion South.